Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Pacers Daily. I'm your host, Hery Acosta. Happy Monday, and let's get things going. First things first, James Johnson. There is no roster spot open for Johnson at the moment. I was reading up on it a little bit. The Pacers knew that they really weren't going to bring him back. Now, he was brought in more of like security rather than actual like playing. But Johnson's been in the league for a very long time. He finally reached his first NBA Finals. He's been a dog since he's come into the league. Now he's obviously never been like a full-time starter or like a big roster guy. But he's been in and there. Like he has his moments where he put up some big stats, some big games. But obviously with the Pacers, he's 37, 38 years old and he's pretty much on the last run of his career. And the Pacers really just had him as security after that whole Milwaukee Bucks Pacers incident a couple of years ago. That whole 64-point Giannis game. Pacers had the game ball. Pacers would then sign Johnson right away. And we've seen it. Johnson is always backing up his teammates. And he knows he's not going to get playing time. And he in the NBA Finals, he played like 2 minutes and got ejected for shoving, I think it was Dylan Jones of the Thunder, which I thought was the most fitting way for James Johnson to get minutes in the finals. It just made sense. But we will miss James Johnson just because, he is a veteran key guy that can help his teammates. He always has his teammates' back, and just someone that still looks, it's still pretty fun to watch play just because he's a 6'9" guy that just kind of runs the point during garbage time, and it's honestly really fun to watch. But now we're gonna throw it back a little bit to the 2000 NBA Finals. There was an interview with Jalen Rose when Kobe went down with an injury in Game 2. Jalen Rose came out and said, "We're not worried about Kobe We're not worried about Kobe. We only if they have Shaq, they're a team." Like, no matter who else they have paired around Shaq. During that time, Shaquille O'Neal was the most dominant, unstoppable player in the NBA. I mean, the dude averaged almost 40 points a game in the finals as a paint center. He made 1 3 in his career and was averaging almost 40 points a game in the finals. Absolutely dominating any team that they played against from 2000 to 2002. That team was just... It was Shaq, then Kobe, and then pretty much anyone else on that roster. Because they had a good roster. They had a really good defense, but they didn't have, a super team until that 2004 season. Which even then, that wouldn't have been really a super team because Malone and Peyton were both almost 40 years old at that time, and that team was pretty much filled with injuries. But yeah, Shaquille O'Neal single-handedly dominated the Pacers in that series. One of the craziest stat lines that someone can average in the finals. And obviously that makes sense as to why Jalen Rose and Reggie Miller would say stuff like that. There's no disrespect to Kobe at all, but at that time, if you had Shaquille O'Neal, you pretty much had a shot at the championship, no matter what. So, and then on over to Donovan Clingan. Now, obviously he's with the Blazers, and he's been with the Blazers since last season. But there are some trade rumors by Bleacher Report. Now, don't always take what Bleacher Report says too seriously. I've seen some very interesting lists that they have made over the past few years, and they were kind of iffy. But this one wasn't horrible. Now, the only reason I don't agree with this take before I say the take is just because we already have a lot of centers on this team, and the trade would work. This trade would work if we added like a second center and then took out the pick. Now the trade was Jarris and a first for Clingan. First off, I feel like everyone is kind of just already given up on Jarris Walker when he's only had 2 seasons to really prove who he is. Now, obviously, he's a lottery pick, but the only few lottery picks from that draft that have already pretty much proven themselves have been Wemby. Because Brandon Miller just had an injury-ridden season. Scoot Henderson's still getting better. And, there's still a lot to be proven by all these players. Koulibaly's still not, that big of a star. So it's probably not time to give up on Jarris Walker just yet. But Clingan is a good player. Clingan is a guy who can get you 10 rebounds and 5 blocks whenever he wants. Now, obviously, that's a crazy stat line because 5 blocks is 5 blocks. But there's been games where he had 8 and 9 blocks. And he was pretty much competing with Wemby to see who would be the blocks leader this year before, obviously, Wemby went out. But Wemby had that in the bag. But Clingan is 7'3". He's a big body. And he's just someone you would want on your team, especially the fact that he's only 21 years old. So this wouldn't be the worst trade. Walker's only a few months older than Walker, and than Clingan, and he's been in the league for a year longer. And obviously Walker didn't get to really play towards the end of the playoffs, so he didn't get to show what he could do on that big stage. He was playing all right in the first few rounds, but then that ankle injury kind of kept him out for a while. But he's a good rotational piece that we should keep for a bit. Now, if this trade does come along, it won't be the end of the world because Clingan is a great player, and we could always throw in another center, like just put Tony Bradley or someone in that trade just to kind of open up a roster spot and then just make sure we're not just overloaded at center. And last but not least, continue to talk about trades. Players like Nikola Vucevic are still on the Bulls, and there still could be something around that. Now, it's funny that I mentioned Jarris Walker earlier because Walker is probably going to be the headliner for at least the Pacers side for most of these trades. Now, if we go for a star, obviously could be an Obi Toppin, could be just someone that we could afford to lose in a trade for a big star. Like back when we traded for Siakam, we lost Bruce Brown, who had signed to a decent deal, and then that turned out to be one of the greatest trades we could have ever pulled off. We traded Sabonis for Halliburton. We traded Brogdon for Nesmith. So we have gotten some pretty good players out of some pretty other decent players, but we've somehow upgraded each time. Back when we got Jalen Smith for Torrey Craig, at the time that was a pretty good trade, and Pacers seem to be doing pretty good in their trades. So, yeah, we'll just see where this goes. We'll see what they end up doing. And just, Pacers are going to do something crazy like they always do. Now, they don't really typically do this in the offseason. Now, 2 of the trades I didn't mention were in an offseason. But the Halliburton and the Smith one were both in season. So, we'll see what they want to do. But as always, I'm your host, Hery Acosta. This is Pacers Daily. Boom, baby, and go, sir.